Okay, would you open your Bibles to the book of Micah? We had just a very brief introduction last Sunday, but I'll give that again so that you can really help me get into this book. If you haven't been to church yet, let me tell you what a treat you're in for with our Centenary College Choir. When their director contacted Dr. Pansera about the possibility of their coming here, we had already set our calendar for March, and it didn't mean that we couldn't move something around if we'd absolutely had to, but this was the Sunday that we'd set for Holy Communion. And I said, oh, gee, it's Holy Communion Sunday. And Joel said, well, actually, there's a little more flexibility there, and, we could actually let them do a little bit more. So they worked it out, he and the director, where they'll start before 11 o'clock, and they do two numbers as introit. So they do two numbers. They already move in. They don't process with us. They're in the choir loft, and they do these first two. And I think you will enjoy them. I mean, enjoy in the very best sense of that word, be blessed by. And then instead of an offertory that Susan normally plays, and then an anthem, they do two anthems right there together just before I preach. And then during communion, they do two more anthems. And then they do also the call to prayer and the response to the benediction, so that you get to do six anthems and two other shorter pieces. So you do get to hear them, and they're outstanding young women and men, and we're grateful that they've come to be with us today. It's a really, really wonderful college. Okay, Micah is the book we're beginning with today, and I think we'll probably get to move on maybe to Nahum and Habakkuk, but we want to do justice to Micah if we possibly can here. If you are new with us, let me tell you we're so glad you've come to our Bible class today. We're working through the Bible again for the third time, but not every verse of every chapter. This time, I'm reading through ahead of you and just highlighting in my Bible things that I think are most important. You can sort of see here, I'm yellowing in the parts that I find in another reading of the whole Bible, things that I think might be most helpful to help you understand. We are now into the portion of the Bible called the Minor Prophets, and I've told you before, it doesn't mean that their message of those 12 are unimportant messages. It simply means they're not very long. Micah's longer than some of the others, but not nearly so long as Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. Those are the three really big ones, long work. And then we have these 12 minor prophets who wrote briefer works than the others. Micah is one of those, and we'll deal with him right after we pray. God, we thank you for this beautiful first day of spring. What a beautiful Sunday morning in March. We thank you for the ways we United Methodist connect to each other. This morning we have evidence of one of our really good colleges, young women and men who are receiving a splendid education, who are required to study humanities, who are required to go to chapel programs and worship together. We thank you for their coming to be with us on their spring tour. Pray in their travels they'll be safe, that those who love them most and hold them closest in their hearts will know that they're being well cared for in Tulsa, and that they will have a great trip the rest of the way and be safely back in Shreveport when their tour is over. We offer now our best as we come to your book, and pray you will enhance our efforts, make them even better, because your Spirit is here guiding and directing. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, begin right from the start with this brief introduction telling you that Micah came from Moresheth. I think this is significant that in a number of these prophetic books, we are told that the prophet comes from a very small town. I mean, that Amos came from Tekoa. Wapanaka. Wewoka, Carthage, and it's nowhere. It's a little nowhere place. And I think it's often trying to remind us that these prophets came from nowhere, little places. Moreshet was, a little village, tiniest little village. Jesus came from Nazareth, which in his day had, scholars are convinced, maybe 300 people. Maybe 300 people. And that God found this person and that person and another person. Of course, not only found Jesus, but was present in Jesus in a way he had not been in anyone else. But here again we have a prophet from nowhere who rises up to speak God's word. In these prophetic books, we often come to this little statement, the word of the Lord. And Lord translates, Eye Asher Eye, I am who I am. Or, as Dr. Brueggemann will be telling you in our series next year, Yahweh. That Yahweh, the word of Yahweh, came to these various prophets. In worship at 11, if you haven't been to church yet, we will read the only passage in all of Torah, the first 5 scrolls, the only passage where it is said the word of the Lord came to a person. Happens often over and over in the prophets, not in the Torah, just once. The word of the Lord came to Abram and Sarah. Okay, we'll deal with that if you haven't been to church yet. Moreshet, nowhere little place, Micah comes to speak the word of the Lord. Now he tells you that he spoke, wrote, during the time of certain kings. And so we can pinpoint those in Israel and Judah's history. I reminded those of you who were in Israel with us just last month that in the heart of the old city, when our guide took us to see the little children, just to watch them play for a few moments so that she could point out a passage of Scripture where from Babylonian exile, the prophets dreamed about a time when little children would play in the streets of Jerusalem again, and old men and old women could sit in the sun and not be afraid. And she wanted us to see this place. Just a little preschool where little 2- and 3-year-olds are out there playing in the playground that morning, and some older men and women sitting in the sun, because it was in the low 50s that morning, reading their newspapers with these little children, hollering and laughing and carrying on with each other just right next to them. But as she led us past these older men and women who were reading their paper in the morning sun, and these little children who were playing with little trikes and things like our children do here at Boston Avenue, then she walked us just 50 yards, maybe farther, maybe not that far, and told you to look down. And as we looked over a little restraining wall, I should say, here was an old wall, just a portion, maybe from here to the television camera back there, 50 feet. But they had unearthed this much of a wall that Hezekiah had built during his reign. And she reminded all of you who went with us that there is a tunnel chiseled out of solid rock down through the old city and out to a very powerful spring, so that if siege was laid to the city of Jerusalem, they would have not one wall, but a double wall, which is much harder to breach if you have one right behind the other, and then a tunnel, cave, if you would, down to the water supply. So we know about Hezekiah. We know when he reigned, and we know that the Assyrians have devastated the northern tribes, the 10 northern tribes, threatens now the city of Jerusalem. And Hezekiah and others are doing everything they can to try to protect the city. So let's begin and see what Micah had to say into that situation. He, along with the others, are convinced that God is sort of holding up his hands and letting these enemies do with the Israelites what they will, because the Israelites have not kept faith with God. Let's start with verse 2. Listen, O earth, and all that is in it, and let Yahweh Elohim be a witness against you. Yahweh, from his holy, set apart temple. It was fun this morning to see the Centenary College Choir. They were getting their first look at the church. A little 8:15, I guess, they were here, just as I was driving up. And all these young people were walking in here and going, wow, like this, you know. I love to see people do that, go, wow, yeah. So, Yahweh, from His holy, set-apart temple, is witnessing against you. For lo, Yahweh is coming out of His place and will come down and tread upon the high places of the earth. Now notice when they say high places, you remember what they're talking about? They're talking about these pagan shrines. And everybody in Micah's time knew about them so well, that's all he had to say. God is going to come out of His holy place on the top of Mount Moriah. And remember, Mount Moriah is not the Matterhorn or anything. It's just the little hill where the temple once stood and where two mosques now stand. Dome of the Rock and El Aqsa are there where the temple once stood. But that God has come out of His set-apart place, holy of holies, if you would, and He is coming out to voice judgment against the high places, because there were so many Israelites who still kept the old gods and goddesses of fertility, along with some celebrations relating to the one true God. I told you this before, but let me just say it again. Gail and I were watching on OETA, I think maybe Discovery, one of those channels. It's been some months ago. But they had some of Israel's best archaeologists who were digging in some of these old ruins, various small communities. And they made this statement that in villages they've unearthed, up until the time of the Babylonian captivity, they always find little gods and goddesses of fertility. That they know. I mean, these archaeologists in 2011, maybe this was done last year in 2010, they know that what the prophets were saying was absolutely true. The people were wishy-washy. Well, we want the Eye Asher Eye, I am who I am, but Assyria is doing really well, maybe we should hold on to their old gods. Well, the Babylonians are doing well, maybe we should hold on to their gods. And these archaeologists said, in every dig we've made, everyone, we have found these little gods and goddesses of fertility until the Babylonian captivity. And after that 50-year exile in Babylon, the gods and goddesses of fertility disappear. That's what they said. Those who came back were convinced our future is with the one true God. That things really changed. Well, Micah's obviously writing and preaching well before that. And they're still trotting up the hills to cavort with the temple prostitutes. They were male and female, and most of them, trying to entice the gods of fertility to make it rain, to have, I tell you, all the cows have calves and all the ewes have lambs and so on. Let's skip to verse 5. Why is God coming out of His holy place and appearing in the tops of these high places? All this is for the transgression. Now, if you have a big unabridged dictionary and you look up the word sin, in the one I have, the first definition is transgression. And transgression is a big, long word that comes from Latin. Trans is a prefix, comes right out of Latin, and always is something crossing over. Transportation is portaging something from here to there. It's crossing over, if you would. When we talk about the transcendent God, I've told you, that comes from transcendere. And I learned Latin when I was at Centenary College. You see, scandere has to do with climbing. So the transcendent God is the one who's big enough to climb even above the heavens. Okay. But transgression has to do with cutting across. Cutting across. We have cut across the will of God. Webster thought that was a good definition of sin, to cut across the will of God. Now, when it says Jacob, you all know by now, it doesn't literally mean Jacob. This is 1,000 years after Jacob, but it means descendants of course. Descendants of. Jacob was given a new name at the Jabbok River, Israel. And so this is about Israel, the people. Okay, what is the transgression of Jacob? Is it not Samaria? Okay, even in Jesus' time, when he stopped to get water at the well, had a conversation with a woman at midday. She said, I cannot believe you're asking me for a drink of water. You know that you and I don't drink out of the same utensils, same containers. You're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan. Samaritans were mixed bloods. The king and queen who had that ancient city built, Samaria, were old Jezebel and Ahab. And they flaunted their priests of Baal, the gods and goddesses of fertility. So, still, when God's judgment comes, everybody who knows Yahweh, who honors and worships Yahweh, knows that Samaria was a terrible place. It was the very heart and center of the gods and goddesses of fertility. And what is the high place of Judah? So he turns his attention now back to the south. Is it not Jerusalem? And everybody talks about going up to Jerusalem and up to Mount Moriah in Jerusalem, where the temple is. Therefore, I will make Samaria a heap. Okay, one of these trapezoidal shapes that's been covered over by the blowing sands. I will make Samaria a heap in the open country, a place for planting vineyards. I will pour down her stones of these high places into the valley and uncover her very foundations. All her images, that is, to these false gods, shall be beaten to pieces. All her wages shall be burned with fire. All her idols I will lay waste. For as the wages of a prostitute she gathered them, and as the wages of a prostitute they shall again be used. Skip to verse 9. Her wound is incurable. It has come to Judah. It has reached to the gate of my people, to Jerusalem. Okay, so as long as Micah is condemning the northern tribes and their capital city, Samaria, and the high places, knowing that Ahab and Jezebel led the people, as many as they could, to adopt and worship these gods and goddesses of fertility, then Micah brings it home. Guess what? It's come right into the heart of our holy place, our Jerusalem, our holy mountain. The unfaithfulness of Israel in the north is the unfaithfulness of Judah in the south. So, skip to verse 16. So make yourselves bald, cut off your hair. Remember when you were really undone, you tore your clothes, and they disheveled their hair. But if you were really undone, you could cut your hair off. So that's what this is about. Show that you are penitent is the thing. And then notice this, for your pampered children. How much of an indictment is that? Your children who've developed this sense that the world owes them. You know any like that? Gee, I know some like that. I can tell you where I meet them often, but I won't right now. Your pampered children. I mean, there's a place I go to work out that most of the older guys my age pick up their towels and throw them in the proper receptacle. When it's spring break and the college kids come home, they don't pick up anything. Nothing. They leave wet towels right where they are, in the middle of the floor, or on the bench where you want to sit down. They get glasses of water, but when they're through, they don't throw them in the trash. They just let them sit wherever they are. You're supposed to pick up the weights you've used and put them back on the rack. They don't pick up their weights. They leave them right in the middle of the floor. Pampered? Yes, I think so. If you're going to cut your hair, make yourselves bald as the eagle, for they have gone from you into exile. I mean, Israel's gone, and your pampered children are going to be gone too. Chapter 2, alas for those who devise wickedness and evil deeds on their beds. That is, while they're supposed to be sleeping, they're thinking of ways to harm somebody else. When the morning dawns, they perform it because it is in their power. They covet fields and seize them, houses and take them away. They oppress householder and house, people and their inhabitants. Do you see the connection he's making here? Where you worship, the one whom you worship has everything to do with the way you behave. If you were going to the holy place in Jerusalem and worshiping the one true God, he would be telling you, don't do that to other people. Don't take their lands. Don't take their houses. Don't sit around and covet. That's one of the 10 Commandments. Do not do that. We have people today, well, it doesn't really matter what you believe as long as you believe. Of course it matters what you believe. Because the one in whom you believe is the one who's supposed to be showing you how to behave. A conservative rabbi from New York City, speaking at the University of Tulsa, said, I never took Christians seriously. When I was a young man, I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood. I went to Jewish schools. I did business with Jews in my neighborhood. I didn't know any Christians. All I knew was the history of Christians and Jews and how many Jews had died at the hands of Christians in Christian communities due to pogroms and so on. I did not take Christianity seriously until my arm was linked with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on one side and a Christian priest on the other. And we were marching across the bridge into Selma, Alabama, and I started taking this brother on my left and this brother on my right more seriously. Why? Because the God they worshipped on Sunday, Dr. Martin Luther King, got his doctor's degree from our Boston University, one of our 13 Methodist seminaries. Grew up a Baptist, got his doctorate, did his doctoral work at Boston University. A Christian, a Roman Catholic priest on the other side of this rabbi. When they started doing things that I knew were right, I started taking Christians seriously. So, the God you worship is supposed to determine how you behave. And if you seem to be doing the right things, then we're more likely to take your God seriously. If you're doing bad things, then how can we possibly take your God seriously? Verse 3, therefore thus says Yahweh, now I am devising against this family, Israel, an evil from which you cannot remove your necks. You shall not walk haughtily, for it will be an evil time. Skip all the way down to verse 12. Always these old prophets, remember I'm telling you they're writing the editorial pages of the paper. The editorial pages. So Assyria's doing this. What does that mean? Babylon's doing this. What does that mean? Our king, our queen are doing this. What does that mean? That's what the prophets are doing. So even though they can be very harsh in their judgments, believing they're speaking straight from God, there's always a word of hope. Look at verse 12. I will surely gather all of you, O Jacob. I will gather the survivors of Israel. I will set them together like sheep in a fold, like a flock in its pasture. It will resound with people. The one who breaks out will go up before them. They will break through and pass the gate, going out by it. Their king will pass on before them, Yahweh at their head. Go read straight on. Micah didn't write in chapter and verse. And I said, listen, you heads of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel. Shall you not know justice? You who hate the good and love the evil. I mean, that's who you are now. Verse 4, but then they will cry to Yahweh. He will not answer them. He will hide his face from them at that time because they have acted wickedly. And surely enough, God let the northern tribes be absolutely destroyed, and he let the southern tribes in time be carried off into exile in Babylon. Chapter 4. But in days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house, that's Mount Moriah, it's just a hill, stood right next to Mount Zion. And as David took Mount Zion, this little hill, from the Jebusites and began the new capital city, it expanded over onto the next adjoining hill, and then they got filled in, that little valley between them. So Mount Zion, Mount Moriah right together. When you see a full-scale model of, it's interesting, in Jerusalem they call it Jerusalem of King Herod's time. But of course most of the people who go to see it are Christians, and so it's Jerusalem of Jesus' time to us. So when you look at the model of Jerusalem of King Herod the Great's time, you see how close the temple was to the palace. Palace was on Mount Zion. Temple was on Mount Moriah. I don't think it's 300 yards apart. Not more than that. They're very close together. So Mount Zion, where the palace would be built. Solomon had already built it many years before. And then the temple, right adjoining over there. Okay. In days to come, the mountain of Yahweh's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised up above the hills. Now, some people who go to Israel convince the guides that this is literally true. One of our guides years ago had been, guiding Hal Lindsey. And so who wrote Late Great Planet Earth, and he had become convinced that Hal Lindsey was right, that an earthquake was going to split Mount Moriah. They do have a lot of earthquakes in the Jordan River Valley, that one day an earthquake would split Mount Moriah, and these two mosques, one would fall one way and one the other, and the New Jerusalem would come right up out of it and tower above everything. I don't think that's what Micah had in mind at all. He simply means, I don't think he means at all that Mount Moriah becomes bigger than the Matterhorn, or Mount Everest, or Kilimanjaro. He means what happens there will be more important than what happens on the other hills. It will be elevated above the others in people's adoration, in their praise, in their devotion. It will be higher than all the other hills. That's the way we United Methodists understand. Peoples then shall stream to it, and many nations shall come and say, "Come, let's go up to the mountain of Yahweh, to the house of the Elohim of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways." You see, the reality, I should say, not person. The reality who is our God has the right to tell us how to behave. And we're supposed to do what he tells us to do, and then people will know the validity of our God by the way we act. When people join our church, we Methodists for years asked them to do 4 things, and then a few years ago the General Conference said, well, we need to add 1 more. Because we discovered most Methodists didn't have an urgency about trying to mention their faith to anybody else, so they added the word witness. We have been asking people, will you be loyal to this family of Christ as long as you're a member here, supporting the church with your prayers, your presence, meaning get your body here as often as you can, your gifts, and your service. And then the General Conference 7 years ago said, and witness. So now we have to add witness. But when I would try to describe to people service, I often said to them, we need people who come down here, as a big group did 2 different nights this week, to prepare food and take it over and serve it at the Day Center for the Homeless. That's a very good thing. Next Friday night, Debbie Peterson's having a lock-in, lock-out thing for the middle schoolers. I told her, Debbie, you and I are far too old to do lock-ins and lock-outs, but she's going to do it anyway. And she'll need a lot of parents, to help her. And they will. They will come and spend all night with these kids, and they take them to a movie somewhere, and they take them to IHOP and feed them pancakes at 3 in the morning or something. I mean, they keep them going all night long. It's an ungodly sort of thing to do. But I don't know where that ever got started. But anyway, Eva Marie says even the 3rd graders have already heard about it, and that when they get their Bibles as 3rd graders, they get to have a lock-in here at the church. And she takes them from the lowest part of the boiler room, shows them, how we heat and air condition the place, and asks me every year if she can have a key to my office and take them up to see my office on the 14th floor. And so they see the building. They see it from top to bottom that night. And she and others who work with her do that. So I tell people, we need people to come and spend the night with middle schoolers or teach a 7th grade class on Sunday morning. But I still believe the greatest service you render the Christian faith is to live out there every day as if you know yourself to be a follower of Jesus Christ. I mean, people do judge our faith by the way we behave. And if our behavior is no different from all of their behaviors, then why should anybody want to come and be a part of us? I mean, how many times as a Protestant, growing up in a little East Texas town, we didn't have many Catholics, not enough for a Catholic priest. And the criticism people would make? Well, as long as they wear that crucifix around their neck, they think they can do anything. And there was enough truth in it, that it stuck. Not all Catholics acted every day as if they knew themselves to be followers of Christ. Not all Protestants did either. So service is so vitally important that we come and learn. Okay, let's go up to the mountain of Yahweh. Not the other high places, that high place, that He may teach us His ways. Remember Torah, most important, 5 scrolls, most important of all the 39 in the Hebrew Scriptures, means instruction or teaching. That He may teach us His ways, and having learned, that we may walk in His paths. For out of Zion, and Zion, has been joined to Moriah by that time, out of Zion shall go forth instruction, Torah, and the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples and arbitrate between strong nations far away. And then come these beautiful words we know. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. But they shall all sit under their own vines and under their own fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid. For the mouth of Yahweh, Yahweh of hosts, has spoken. For all the peoples walk, each in the name of its Elohim. But we will walk in the name of Yahweh, our Elohim, forever and ever. Isn't that beautiful? It's wonderful. This fellow from a little nowhere place could say such beautiful, powerful things. Begins with the indictment. You have sinned. You've trekked up and down to these high places. But the day will come, maybe only a remnant that's left, who will come to the holy mountain for the right reasons. And eventually, and this is where they talk about the Messianic age, if you would, in the Messianic age, then peace, shalom, goodwill for all. Okay, but let's go to chapter 5, because this is the reason most people, most Christians, I should say, know about Micah. It's in chapter 5, because we read it every Christmas. Start with verse 2. But you, O Bethlehem of Ephrathah, who are one of the little clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to rule in Israel. Okay, it then goes on to talk about how old Bethlehem is. The first time we hear about Bethlehem is way back there in the time of Jacob, when he and his mother tricked his twin brother Esau and the aged father. Jacob fled for his life. Esau said he's going to kill him. Jacob was gone to the north, back to the north country, to his mother's people. They turned out to be just like his mother, cheating, taking advantage. He spent 20 years there, ended up marrying 2 of his uncle's daughters, cousins, and 2 handmaids. Each of them had 1 each, and these 4 women, basically in Jacob, start making babies. And they end up all together making 12. But favored wife, only 2. The last 2, Joseph and Benjamin. Giving birth to Benjamin, she died, and they buried her at Bethlehem. Bethlehem. That's when it's mentioned first. Okay. The next really important time we hear about Bethlehem comes in sermon 2 weeks away, I believe. I don't work that far ahead, but I know what the text and title is. I think it's 2 weeks away. We read the story of first king of the Israelites, Saul. Samuel, you remember, did not want to anoint him. Told him, kings take. You don't want a king. Yeah, we want a king. Everybody else got a king. We want a king. And then Saul turned out to be such a dud. And so God said to Samuel, okay, we got to find somebody else. And he sent him to this little nowhere place called Bethlehem. In Hebrew, remember, they don't have a TH sound, just a T sound. Bethlehem is the way they say it. Sent him to Bethlehem. Told him, you're going to meet a fellow there named Jesse. He got a house full of boys. I want you to go and look at them, and I'll help you know which one is going to be the next king. Gee, Samuel said, if King Saul hears that I've gone to Bethlehem looking for a new king, he's going to kill me. Well, just tell him you went to make sacrifice there. So Samuel goes to Jesse's house and says, I understand you got a house full of boys. Yeah, I do. Could I take a look at them? The Lord sent me here. Oh, sure. So he brings in his oldest. Number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Is all the boys you got? Got one more. He really is just a boy. He's out looking after the goats. Call him in. And when David came in, Samuel knew he was the one. So this verse becomes important to the writers of the gospel. A descendant of David who would need to come from David's hometown, Bethlehem. And they write the Gospels that Mary and Joseph went to Bethlehem when she was expecting a baby any day, and that baby was born in Bethlehem today. They tell you, in a cave under the inn. In a cave under the inn. And we read this every Christmas Eve. Whose origin is from of old, Bethlehem, from ancient days. Therefore he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has brought forth. Then the rest of his kindred shall return to the people of Israel. And he shall stand and feed his flock in the strength of Yahweh, in the majesty of the name of Yahweh his Elohim. and they shall live secure. For now he shall be great to the ends of the earth, and he shall be the one of shalom. Yet through the centuries they decided after Micah, no, he's going to ride the black stallion. He's going to ride the black stallion. But he didn't come to be the Messiah of war. He came to be the Messiah of shalom, and he rode the burro. I know not everybody in Tulsa sees little burros often. So I was so glad we went to Bethlehem. They got to see a little burro and his mom. He had his winter coat. He looked like a little woolly bear almost. And enough tourists had been through there that he had decided people are really nice. And he'd walk over and put his head over just so you would rub his neck, scratch his head. A tiny little burro Jesus chose to ride down that winding road that we walked from the top of the Mount of Olives down to the Kidron into the old walled portion of the city. A burro, not the black stallion. When he comes, he shall be the one of shalom. We read it every Christmas Eve, that beautiful passage. Let's go to chapter 6. So, hear what Yahweh says. Rise, plead your case before the mountains, and let the hills hear your voice. Hear, you mountains, the controversy of Yahweh, and you enduring foundations of the earth, for Yahweh has a controversy with his people, and he will contend with Israel. So God pleads the case through Micah's mouth here. Oh, my people, what have I done to you? In what have I wearied you? Answer me. I brought you up from the land of Egypt, redeemed you from the house of slavery. I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. O my people, remember now what King Barak of Moab devised, what Balaam, son of Beor, answered him. These are people that plotted against the tribes as they were trying to move toward Canaan. What happened from Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the saving acts of Yahweh. Shittim to Gilgal is when they finally crossed the river. With what shall I come before Yahweh? Here another's a great passage. And bow myself before Elohim on high. Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of olive oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good. This beautiful passage, okay? God is contending with his people. What I've asked you to do, he's saying, is so simple. And what does Yahweh require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with your Elohim. Isn't that beautiful? That's why it got in the Bible. That's why it got in the Bible. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. Well, I think that's the message of Micah. Any questions about that one? Let's move on to Nahum. In some ways, Nahum should have been put just before Micah, because it's dealing with the very thing that Jonah dealt with. Remember Jonah living at a place called Joppa. Joppa is still a suburb, if you would, of Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is a very modern city of 1 million people. But it's just 10 minutes, and you're right in the heart of this little port city of Joppa. And I told you last Sunday there's a little bronze whale in one of the parks there, sort of winking at you. I got Jonah, I'll get you too. It was in Joppa, you see, that the word came to Jonah. I want you to go to Nineveh, the capital city of Assyria. and preach the word of Yahweh. So he got on a ship and went that way, to Tarshish, to Spain. And if you don't understand Jonah's reaction, then you need to read Nahum, because Nineveh was a bad place. It was a bad place. And Nahum is writing against the sins of that great city. Okay? We won't read it all, but we'll read enough to help you, I hope. Start with verse 2 then. What begins an oracle concerning Nineveh. A jealous and avenging Elohim is Yahweh. This writer is going to tell you that God finally has enough. And when He has enough, He does something about it. We're going to be reminded of this image of God, that He is slow to anger. And I've told you, in Hebrew, this anger is a word that means literally fire in the nose. And so the imagery is sort of God is really big, therefore must have a really big nose, and so it takes a while for the fire to build up in God's nose, but when it does, you better stand back. And some of the images you see of God are almost like a fiery dragon, if you would. When He gets to that point, you better back up. It's sort of like a flame-throwing God at that point. So Nahum has had it with all these sinful folks, and his vision is of God's anger. God is really angry with what Nineveh and the Assyrian Empire have done to the north. A jealous and avenging Elohim is Yahweh. Yahweh is avenging and wrathful. Yahweh takes vengeance on His adversaries and rages against His enemies. Yahweh is slow to anger, but great in power, and Yahweh will by no means clear the guilty. How does He deal with them? His way is in whirlwind and storm, and the clouds are the dust of His feet. He rebukes the sea and makes it dry. He dries up all the rivers. Bashan and Carmel wither. Let's stop a second. I don't think our guide this time pointed out Bashan to all of you. Don't remember her ever mentioning Bashan. Carmel, we certainly saw our first full day. We went up to the top of Mount Carmel, where Elijah took on the prophets of Baal. One of the women who went with us, I won't call her name, but she walked in our staff meeting 10 days ago, right at noon when we were just breaking, and she said, I have a question. She and 3 other women on the tour had all been showing each other their pictures, and she said, we've all got a picture of this big stone statue of a guy with a sword in his hand, and we can't remember who he was. I said, Elijah, up on Mount Carmel. Elijah, once he defeated the prophets of Baal, he did what David did to Goliath. He cut their heads off. So, Carmel is, again, not the Matterhorn, just a hill just outside modern-day Haifa. It's up north. Bashan is straight across from there. If you go over to, literally, as to north and south, you go straight over from Carmel, you would come to the Sea of Galilee. And right up on the northernmost part up there, it's a demilitarized zone now. The United Nations patrols it on the Golan Heights, was in biblical times called Bashan. And right above this freshwater lake, the grass grew very tall and green, and the cows got big and fat. And so, more than once, the prophets speak about you fat cows of Bashan, devouring what belongs to the poor, you say. So, all right, so Bashan and Carmel. And the bloom of Lebanon, and Lebanon, of course, is just immediately north of Israel, where they grow still to this day, the magnificent cedar trees that do really well there. Remember, Solomon arranged for some of those magnificent trees to be cut in Lebanon and tied into rafts and floated down the Mediterranean as close as they could get to Jerusalem, and then carried overland to build the temple and his palace. Okay. The mountains quake before him. The hills melt. They've seen a lot of volcanoes through the years. Earthquakes, lots of earthquakes. The earth heaves before him, the world and all who live in it. Who can stand before his indignation? Who can endure the heat of his anger? See, again, it's fire in the nose. His wrath is poured out like fire, and by him the rocks are broken in pieces. But underneath all that, he reaffirms, but Yahweh is good. A stronghold in a day of trouble. That word can also mean fort. He's a fort. You run to him. He protects those who take refuge in him, even in a rushing flood. He will make a full end of his adversaries and will pursue his enemies into darkness. All right, skip to verse 12 with me. Thus says Yahweh, though they are at full strength and many, his enemies, they will be cut off and pass away. Though I have afflicted you by withholding my support because of your sinfulness, I will afflict you no more. And now I will break off his yoke from you and snap the bonds that bind you. And here we have more beautiful words in verse 15. You know these. Look. After saying, that fire finally builds in Yahweh's nose and he deals with his enemies, but these prophets always come to a word of hope. When I'm marrying people, I'm counseling before I marry them. And particularly if they're leaving Tulsa, I say, now you need to find a church where you both will worship. But if you find that you're going to a church where the preacher beats up on you every Sunday, you're in the wrong place. I know preachers like that. And they can keep people coming in big numbers because they just scare the daylights out of them and then pretend they're the only hope they have. I said, every Sunday you should hear words of encouragement. We preachers have to talk about sin because it's real. But that should never be the last point in the sermon, ever. You should leave the church where you worship, walking to your car and hearing God whispering, I'm going to help you do this better. I'm going to help you do this better. You've been a Grinch this week. I'm going to help you do this better. You pouted 3 or 4 days. I'm going to help you do this better. It's an encouraging word. The gospel is an encouraging word, a hopeful word. And so here Nahum comes to his. Look. On the mountains, the feet of one who brings good tidings, who proclaims shalom. Celebrate your festivals, O Judah, fulfill your vows, for never again shall the wicked invade you. They are utterly cut off. And then to this wicked city, Nineveh, a shatterer has come up against you. Guard the ramparts, watch the road, gird your loins, collect all your strength. For Yahweh is restoring the majesty of Jacob as well as the majesty of Israel. The ravagers have ravaged them and ruined their branches, meaning the next generation and the next and the next, like a family tree. Skip to verse 8. Nineveh is like a pool whose waters run away. Halt, halt, but no one turns back. Plunder the silver, plunder the gold. There's no end of treasure, and abundance of every precious thing. Devastation, desolation, destruction, hearts faint, knees tremble, loins quake, all faces grow pale. Why? Because Israel's God has finally decided to act. And He's chosen Babylon to deal with Assyria. The Babylonians will destroy the biggest part of the city of Nineveh and its people. Look at verse 13. See, I am against you, the Ninevites, says Yahweh of hosts. I will burn your chariots in smoke, and the sword shall devour your young lions. I shall cut off your prey from the earth, and the voice of your messengers shall be heard no more. Chapter 3. Ah, city of bloodshed, utterly deceitful, full of booty, no end to the plunder, the crack of whip and rumble of wheel, galloping horse and bounding chariot, horsemen charging, flashing sword and glittering spear, piles of dead, heaps of corpses, dead bodies without end. They stumble over the bodies. because of the countless debaucheries of the prostitute, gracefully alluring mistress of sorcery, who enslaves nations through her debaucheries and peoples through her sorcery. I am against you, says Yahweh of hosts, and will lift up your skirts over your face, and let the nations look on your nakedness and kingdoms on your shame. I will throw filth at you and treat you with contempt and make you a spectacle. Then all who see you will shrink from you and say, Nineveh is devastated. Who will bemoan her? Where shall I seek comforters for you? Okay, but stop and think now. I told you just the book before Micah, Jonah, was a parable. And I think you need to put it right alongside Nahum. Because Nahum is really rejoicing that Nineveh has got her comeuppance. That what she's done to others is now being done to her. But there was someone, we don't know who, wrote the book of Jonah. And said, guess what? God loves Ninevites too. He loves Assyrians too. Israel, Jonah, go preach the good news to them. And this storyteller said, how do we know that if someone had preached the good news, even the king and all the people might have repented in sackcloth and ashes and turned to the Lord? That's what the book of Jonah says. So you need to put one right alongside the other. Nahum's rejoicing, in a sense, that their old enemy is now destroyed. But somebody else has gotten a different word from God. What might Nineveh have been? What might the Assyrian people have been had they ever heard the good news preached to them? Let's finish up Nahum start with verse 18. Your shepherds are asleep, O king of Assyria. Your nobles slumber. Your people are scattered on the mountains with no one to gather them. There is no assuaging your hurt. Your wound is mortal. All who hear the news about you clap their hands over you. For who has ever escaped your endless cruelty? Okay, we've got about 3 minutes, but because Dr. Pansera wanted to give our visiting choir a little more opportunity to sing to you, they start before the hour. Because they know we've got 60 minutes on television, 58 minutes and 30 seconds to be exact. And so they've been told that. And they started the 8:30 service about 8:25. And they will start this one early too, so that we can, the television can start and we can get through in plenty of time. What is next week? May 27th. Okay, I'll make a mark there. So all I'm saying is, if you want to get a drink of water and go to the bathroom, this will be a good time. Get back in here and hear this great choir before the service starts.